Hello and welcome to one of my favorite ladies. One of my favorite ladies is Lucy Brazier, who I've known for many, many years. Lucy is one of those people that once you know her, you always just want to meet up with her time and time again. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Lucy to all of you today, so you can actually hear the wisdom of what Lucy has done and said over the years. Lucy Brazier is one of the world's leading authorities on the administrative profession. As CEO of Marcham Publishing, specialist publishers of Executive Support magazine, Lucy's passion is for the assistant role to be truly recognized as a career and not just a job. With access to the most forward-thinking, passionate and knowledgeable administrative business leaders in the world, as well as personally meeting and speaking to literally thousands of assistants over the last 10 years, Lucy's knowledge of the market and what assistants all over the world are facing on a day-to-day basis are second to none. In 2001, Lucy was awarded an OBE in recognition for her services to office professionals. Lucy, hello and huge welcome to the ISMA Summit and the ISMA platform. Now, the story that comes from you is huge. There's lots of journeys, there's lots of chapters. And I'd like to start off with all of this and say to you, all of this hasn't happened to you just like that. There have been many challenges along the way. And having to balance your work and home life is never that easy, I would have thought. So my first question to you is for our audience, is that I'm aware that you burnt out and were exhausted at one point in your career and had to go from a six-figure salary to zero. What happened and what was your learning?
Well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for having me, Carole. It's an absolute delight to be here with ISMA and to be doing this interview, and I really appreciate the time to tell my story. So, yes, I was working as a publishing director. I had worked in publishing for the best part of 24 years at that point, and I made my way up through the ranks from working at a local newspaper and ended up as a publishing director for a company that was about a £94 million turnover. And looking after 13 magazines and all the associated events and staff all over the world. And it was a wonderful, wonderful job. However, I was on a train probably at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was very rarely home before 10 o'clock at night. Between us, my husband and I have 7 children, 3 of mine and 4 of his, but we were all living together. And we were at year end. And at year end, we had thought that we were ahead of budget, and it turned out that we weren't. We were about 48 grand behind because there had been a mix up. And so I had to get everybody to put their foot on the pedal and to really push to hit target. And then we were in recession, and the powers that be decided that maybe they weren't going to pay out bonus that year, and everybody else had thought that I had known. So at that point, I was working so flat out and I was so tired, and people kept asking me whether I was all right. And I kept saying, yes, I'm fine. Of course I'm fine, as you do, I think. But I was becoming more and more aware that I was on trains and buses in the morning and thinking, I really don't think I can do this today. And this particular day, I walked into the office, I looked at my computer, and it was almost like my brain had gone, well, if you're not going to stop, I'm going to stop you. And I couldn't think of one thing that I had to do. And it was really quite terrifying. And I put my head round the door of my executive and I said, you know, I'm going home for the rest of the day. I think I just really need to sleep. And I went back to the doctor because I was totally overwhelmed. And if I'm honest, I was having suicidal thoughts, even if I would never have carried it through. And the doctor just said to me, go home. You can't do this. Currently, you just need to sleep, and gave me tablets. And 5 weeks later, when I went to go back to work because I was feeling so much better, they had reorganized. But it was probably the best thing that has ever happened to me. They made me redundant. I'd spent years thinking I've got to work in this way because I've got all these kids to support and we need the money coming in and got to keep going. You know, we often do that, don't we? We tell ourselves these stories. And when it was suddenly all taken away, I had no choice other than to stop and to reevaluate. And how often in life do we have the opportunity to do that? So I sat back and I looked at it and I thought, what do I really want to do? And I'd acquired a newsletter in 2003, which was for administrative professionals. And I had always wanted to turn it into a proper magazine. And this was the opportunity, because I was given a year's salary, and so I used some of that to start the magazine, and that was launched in 2011, and the rest is history. And very often people say to me, don't you worry with the amount that you're working now that you're going to burn out again? And the truth is, I really don't think it would ever happen that way again, because I think I have far more awareness of the signs. And there are days where I will take time out to go and do my own thing because it's my own business. And when I recognize I'm getting overtired, I will go to bed early. I eat far better. I exercise far more. But also, I think there was none of that corporate backbiting and second guessing and office politics and all that stuff. Now I'm working in a business that runs the way that I want it to run. So it means that I'm far more able to keep an eye on myself and make sure that I'm okay.
So would you say, because what you seem to be saying there, Lucy, is that control has been a major issue for you, insofar as now you are in control, it's your own business, you can manage it, you can take time out as and when you want to. So would you say that was different, you're different today, because I know you're extremely busy in this country and around the world. So would you say there's a big difference today to how you were all those years ago when you did burn out?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's one of the really interesting things about hybrid working and the response that there has been to that. And there's all this talk at the moment about quiet quitting and people saying, well, you know, people who are realizing that they've been pushed too hard and going back to doing the bare minimum and just doing the job. And I have to say, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, now, come on. You are paid to work between this hour and this hour. And there has been a culture that says we should be overworking and we should be driving ourselves to distraction. Is it quiet quitting, or is it people actually doing the job that they're paid to do and realizing that there's more to life?
So what are people saying to you, what are causing them the most amount of stress at the moment?
I think there are all sorts of things. I think mainly it's the unknown. None of us like change, and this is a world that's in an acute state of change, and there's no certainty. And it doesn't matter whether you feel secure in your business or not. The way that the business is going to work moving forwards is still shaking down. And so we don't have a clear picture as to how that's going to look. And I think especially for the assistants who are the audience that I work with, of course, a lot of them are feeling really invisible because they're at home and they're not quite sure what they're meant to be doing. And the other half of them are absolutely flat out doing all sorts of things that they weren't doing before. So it's that unknown. And I think to get back to a point where everybody is feeling far less stressed, we need to understand what the future of work looks like. And that could take years to work out, because I feel like we've got to address this question, what is the office for? As opposed to just thinking, well, we want you in the office for 3 days and we want you at home for 2 days, or whatever your particular balance is. Or if you're at home, how are we going to make sure that the communication piece is there and that you're still seen as being invaluable? And how do we make sure that everybody is safe? Because when we don't have safety, of course, there's anxiety as well. So there's a whole heap of things in play there. And it isn't going to be a quick solution. So to me, the best thing to do is to be looking at it and going, well, what do personally I need? And everything just changed. So what is one more change? And I would really urge anybody listening to this to have those conversations, because whilst they're working out what it's going to look like, you don't want to remain silent. You want to have your say, because otherwise they're going to design it for you and you're going to have to fit into it. So if you're feeling particularly passionately about something in your life that you really need, or that you've discovered about yourself in the last couple of years, now is the time to find your voice and to speak up about it.
But do you find that some of the assistants are concerned about speaking up because if they do, they may be in fear of their jobs? Is there a factor there?
I don't think so. I think assistants have never been terribly good at speaking up, full stop. Very often they think that they will seem stupid, mainly because they operate on the whole outside of the core business, although that's something coming out of COVID, which is becoming less and less as businesses understand that they have to prove the return on investment of every member of staff. But I think it isn't so much about losing jobs, because the recruiters that I'm talking to in the UK are telling me that there are far more jobs than there are assistants applying for them. And that's because so many of the businesses are categorically saying we want people in the office 5 days a week, and the assistants are saying, well, we're just not prepared to do that. So it's remodeling, I think, rather than anything else. I think the reason they don't speak up on the whole is more just because it hasn't been that way. And we were talking earlier about your theme of collaboration, and I think that's really interesting because assistants traditionally have been seen as being in a subservient relationship. So their executive's been the master and the assistant's been far more of the servant. But it really is changing, and that's partly because of this new world of work. And of course, collaboration is the new buzzword. And very often people say, so what's the difference? What's the difference between teamwork, which is the way we used to work, and collaboration, which is how we are now? And I think the best analogy for that is one that is I use quite often in my training, which is to take the example of putting on a play, a theatrical play. So if you were doing teamwork, what you would have is your stage management and your lighting designer and your sound engineer and your actors, of course, and the people who do costumes, and a director. And the director is telling everybody what to do. They've got their goal in mind. Nobody particularly has to like each other, but they're all working together in order to make sure that they come out the other end of that with a product which is what the audience want. Collaboration is totally different because it's not just working together, it's thinking together. And there has to be an amount of trust and respect in order to get that done. And so in the example of my play, everybody would come together on the first morning and everybody would bring their skill sets and they would work together to work out how they were going to get to a point where they were putting on the best play they possibly could. And it's all about setting a goal at the end of it, because if you don't have the goal at the end of it, then you're not going to have clarity on what you're trying to achieve, and it's chaos. But you've got to take ego out of it. It's got to be, in the case of the assistant, what's best for the business and not what's best for the individuals. And as I say, it's got to be about trust and respect. And in the case of the assistant, they are bringing their very strong skill set to work alongside their executives who also have a very strong skill set, but a different one, so that they can work collaboratively, bringing both their skills into doing what's best for the business. So whereas it used to be the executive was here and the assistant was here, now the playing field has very much leveled out where businesses understand it. And why that's so interesting with the future of work is because I am being told all over the place that the future is not going to be 9 to 5, which of course was invented by Ford when he launched his factories, but it's going to be about setting goals. And as long as you hit your goals within the allotted time, businesses are going to be happy. So if you and your executive understand what the goals are and you're working together collaboratively, you come out the other end of that, hitting the goals, and that's what the businesses are going to need, which is why I think it's such a buzzword.
And are assistants happy to go with that collaborative model?
I think that most assistants would really like to be working that way. I think the businesses need to catch up, and I think quite often the executives don't understand how to best utilize their assistants to make sure that they are getting the most out of them. And I also think they quite often don't understand what they are there for. You know, they're employed by the business, they're not employed by the executive, and they're employed by the business to make sure that every hour of the executive's salary is best spent. So to find the most effective ways of shaving time off that executive's hour so that that drops to the bottom line and the executive is freed up to do the things they're being paid their big salaries to do. And I think once that is clear, it becomes far easier for assistants and executives to work in a more collaborative fashion.
So is it that, because you mentioned before about assistants not necessarily being the best at speaking up and speaking out, is it that that's the route that you go down, which is to empower them to do that?
Yes, and that's exactly what I'm all about. You know, I spend my life training assistants and training them in all sorts of productivity stuff and training them in all sorts of ways to get their mindset shifted. But more than anything, it's giving them permission to say you are a core part of the business and you do deliver an awful lot for your executive when you're doing it properly. So don't underestimate that. And you have a duty to speak up and to find your voice, because especially around process and procedure, which is what is their major power, I suppose, quite often they know better. I don't know about you, Carole, but as a CEO, I'm great at coming up with our ideas and driving things forward and having people follow me as a leader and all that stuff. But do I want to do process and procedure? Quite frankly, I'd rather stick pins in my eyes.
Yes, I echo that completely. So it's horses for courses. We can't be good at everything, and we're not. It's knowing what your strengths are and utilizing those strengths accordingly. Let's take you into the international field. I know that what you're doing is actually going right around the world. Tell our viewers a little bit of what you're doing internationally.
Oh, thank you, Carole. So yes, I just go where I'm asked to go, really. So I do an awful lot of traveling around the world and speaking at conferences, but also going into businesses and training their assistants and working with executives to talk to them about how to best utilize their administrative professionals, but more and more working with HR departments to put some kind of career framework in place for assistants so that they can measure performance and they can make sure that everybody is being treated the same way, and also so the business can work out what the ROI is on each administrative professional. And that's come off the back of a massive piece of work which you may have seen from the World Administrators Alliance, which is on the Global Skills Matrix, which is that career framework that was signed off by 29 different associations for assistants globally. So I do spend an inordinate amount of time on the road. The year before COVID, I think it was 42 countries. This year is going to be something like 20. So we're starting to get back to where we were. And that, of course, has all sorts of problems of its own, albeit that it's a total joy to go to all sorts of places that I never knew I would go to, and to meet so many different assistants. And that means that I really have my finger on the pulse as to what's going on globally, which I don't think is something that anybody else is really able to do at the level that I do it. But obviously you get very tired. Obviously there are a lot of time zones. You have to really pace yourself. You have to make sure you are exercising, you are eating properly. But that also has a knock-on effect with the rhythm of the business, because if I'm not here, it's very difficult to meet on a daily basis with my staff and to keep them up to date with how that works. And I'm going to be absolutely honest about that and say that we started the office here in Spain 2 years ago in November. This is the first time I've been out on the road. Matthew, who was my assistant, is no longer working for me. And I have a new assistant called Fran, who is absolutely phenomenal. But not one of my team has ever worked with me when I've been out on the road yet. So we are reinventing that and working out what that looks like and trying to work out what they need while I'm doing it. And that can be really quite stressful at times, but I have no doubt that we'll get there because it's what I'm meant to be doing. And it's just the structure of saying, well, actually, what are the clear roles? Lucy is out there, she's driving the business forward, she's meeting people, she's doing the market research, she's doing the training, and then she is throwing business behind her and everybody else is catching that and making sure that that happens. And that is partly about me empowering them and making them feel that they are really able to do the thing without having to check in with me all the time.
So we're coming up not far away from 2023. What would you regard as your challenges for next year?
So I think it's not saying yes to everything, because I have a tendency to do that just because I love what I do so much. But whereas when I started this business, I was in my 40s, I'm now 53. And I have to say, the other thing is that when I first started traveling, the first year it was like 4, and the year after that it was 20. And then it kind of built. So the year before COVID was 42 countries, but it was also 183 events. Now it's like running a marathon with no training, because I'm having to go from 0 to suddenly stepping up into this big level. So, I think that is a major challenge, making sure that we have that rhythm within the business working properly and everybody understanding clearly what they're doing, but we're getting there. And I think for me, it really is just making sure that we are on top of everything rather than trying to do too many different things, maybe paring it back slightly so we're not juggling quite so many balls. Because over COVID, we readapted the business. We went and launched on a whole heap of online stuff. And now, of course, we've got live stuff back as well. So it's trying to work out what of those things we keep moving forwards rather than this year, which has been, oh gosh, now we're back to live events. Let's do some of those as well. I don't think we need all of it.
So your marketplace in some ways has changed, because if you're not going to use all of it, but some of your online, I'm assuming, is going to stay.
Yes, definitely. We'll keep the 2 online events, but we were doing 6 events globally every year. Now, that was a challenge before COVID with the number of people we had got. And we're kind of at a point where we're going from being a small to medium business into turning into a medium business. And that's always painful, because you've got to work out how you juggle all that stuff and make sure that it all works correctly, rather than just going, oh, that's a good idea, let's go and do that, and then finding you haven't got the resource either in terms of people or money to do it. So, you know, it's a really interesting time for us, but one that's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what 2023 has to bring.
And I think a lot of viewers will actually echo that in terms of what you've outlined there. Onto some personal things, Lucy. I want to know, with your busy lifestyle, and it's going to be busy next year as well, where does your husband fit in? I want to know that. And where are all these hundreds of children? I assume they're older now. So how do you manage? Do you ever see your husband? Does he go with you? Are the kids in school? How is your life, Lucy?
Okay, well, firstly, children. My youngest one is 26. So I have 2 of my children living in London, and I have one of my sons living here with us in Spain. He lives in the Old Town, which is about 20 minutes walk away from where I live. And he works for me. He does all my social media stuff for me. So that works very nicely. My stepboys are all in London. My husband is here. My husband is 20 years older than me. He is absolutely rock solid, and for the longest time has said, Lulu, just go and do the thing. I had my chance to do that and I loved it, and I love the fact you're so passionate about what you do, and I've got you, you know. And he really does have me. When I get home, we talk a lot, but he does also come with me when we do certain trips. So I've got one coming up in a couple of weeks where I'm doing a month away, and I shall be in Bangalore and Singapore and Sydney and Dubai over the course of that month. And I'm training for in some places for 2 days a week, and for some places 4 days a week, but he and I will be there and going and seeing some things in between. So what he tends to do is to be here and to be keeping an eye on things, but then when he sees a trip that he thinks he might quite like, he says, oh, that sounds nice, maybe I could come on that one.
So in which case, with a very busy schedule coming up, and thank you for filling us in about your husband and the children, because I know viewers will be interested. So how does she manage all of this? So they've very good to get one of the sons into your business. I like that idea very much. Like that idea. Okay, what relieves your stress? What technique do you use that you can rely on that would really relieve your stress? Because it's a busy life. Doesn't mean it's stressful, but stress is all about is too much pressure. As long as you manage your pressure, you're being okay. So how do you manage your own stress levels?
I think I'm very lucky. Duncan, my husband, was very clear right from when I met him 25 years ago now, that when he retired, he wanted to retire somewhere that was warm and beautiful. And so we made the leap and moved to Spain in 2020, which made a huge difference to finances. Firstly, because it's so much cheaper to live here. It means we eat out maybe 4 times a week, but obviously the food is a Mediterranean diet, so it's very healthy. I also took the decision to get myself an office, and the office is 35 minutes walk from my home, and it's along the seafront, which is very, very beautiful. So every morning I walk to work, and quite often I listen to music, and sometimes I listen to podcasts like Guy Raz, How I Built This, you know, so it's always inspiring. But I need that. It's an hour and 10 minutes of walking a day, which firstly keeps me fit. I need it for mental fitness as much as I need it for my physical fitness. The sound of the sea is always great. You know, and as I said, I am just aware that it's those things. It's the eating properly, the walking, the exercise, the space to switch off and do other things, and the sleeping properly that are going to keep me well. Because when you look at the list, those are the 4 things that really jumped out at me. And so being here, you know, the food is great, the exercise is great, the sleeping is good. I most of the time sleep with my window open and I can hear the sea, which helps. But also at the weekend, I go on holiday. When I'm not away, there is a beach at the end of my road. It's about 100 meters from my apartment. And very often at the weekend, we'll go to lunch and then we'll go and sit on the beach and read and swim and all that stuff. So there is a much better balance now than there was in London, where I could quite frankly be at my desk at 7 in the morning and not turn off my computer until 11 o'clock at night if I was working on something I was really passionate about.
So, which begs the question, because you seem to have it sorted, we like it, we're going to be on your doorstep to go for the walk with you. For those people who are in London, who are sitting behind their computers, who don't have that opportunity to take the beach walk and don't necessarily have a Duncan that's that supportive towards them, what sort of hints and what tips might you have for some of our viewers?
It's brain space, I think, more than anything else, and understanding that you need some time for you. You can do anything and you can work as hard as you need to, but be mindful if you're starting to feel tired or overwhelmed, or if you're eating your third takeaway this week, or, you know, especially at the moment in the UK, and my parents are still in the UK, and as I say, a couple of my kids are still in the UK, and my sister too. And there is an enormous amount of anxiety around this cost of living crisis and, you know, all the rest of it. Over COVID, and I have to say, exercise has never really been my thing, but I started walking 2 hours a day and I have never felt better. Wow. It got my mind in order. It meant that I had space to look at lovely things. And it's why I got my office here when I got here. You know, I was going to Richmond Park and I was literally walking for 2 hours every day. And I was getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I was doing it then because I didn't have time in the rest of my day. It totally changed my outlook on everything. So I think it's being honest with yourself, really, because I think we got ourselves into a mindset over the course of COVID where we felt that it was almost a war mentality, where we were, right, we all have to be in this together. We have to really work together to get through this. And so people stopped taking holiday and people said yes to everything. And I had somebody quite recently who was managing a really large team of assistants who was saying that 36% of the roles are empty currently, and another 20% are on the watch list because they're worried they're going to burn out. And, you know, he quite honestly said with me, over COVID, the partners stepped up to do 12 meetings a day as opposed to 8 meetings a day, and the assistants supported them in this. And now none of them know how to go enough. We need to go back to what we were doing before. So, you know, I would be looking very honestly and thinking, where am I at? And it goes back to my point right at the beginning about having conversations. And if you can't do that in person, do it on a Zoom. Sit and prepare what you want to say. If you feel like it's going slightly awry and it isn't working for you, sit down and say, you know, can I have a meeting with you? I just want to talk through a few things, especially in the case of my assistants. The communication piece is always the problem, and it may be for everybody else as well. Most of the problems come from lack of communication. So can we have a 10-minute meeting every morning to look at what your priorities are for today so that I'm best serving you, to make sure that you can do your work to the best of your ability? And with everything changing so fast and with the priorities changing so fast, really having those conversations so that they understand where you fit in, and if there are things you're struggling with, or indeed if there are resources that you need, will help you to feel heard, will help you to feel less out of control, and that makes the change less of a problem.
Lucy, that's been such a really insightful and enriching conversation. I really value your time, and all of us will really appreciate listening to this. And we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about communication, and it doesn't matter, you happen to be talking about assistance, it doesn't matter which group of people we're talking about, it doesn't matter which demographic. The words that come from you are all about control, making time for yourself, learning to say no, and of course, taking yourself up to Spain. It's very nice. And I accept the fact that we can't all do that. However, we can take the principles of what you are saying, which is, okay, I may not be able to walk along the beach, but I can walk. And if anything taught me about COVID is about the fact, get yourself out there and just get walking. I got myself a dog as well who asks for the walk. That's the only thing I was missing, Lucy. You haven't got a dog. Have you got a dog? No dog.
I
No
don't
dog.
have a dog. I travel too much to have a dog.
Okay, well, there's the answer to that. So I've got the dog, and also a dog minder as well for when I travel. So it's been really interesting because it's actually given us an insight into you, what goes on behind you, what you've managed to achieve over the past many years, what you're looking at for the future, and your passion and your motivation for who you are and what you're doing is key to everything. Because I think, as Duncan said to you, because he said in this conversation, just do what you're good at and do what you're passionate about. And when you do that, it's no longer stress because you love what you do. I think there is so much learning that comes from this conversation. I knew it was a good idea to invite you, Lucy Brazier, to our platform. And now more than ever, I'm so delighted. And thank you very much indeed for your time. If anybody wants to get in contact with you, Lucy will be there to actually have a chat with you at any time. Thank you so much indeed for your time, Lucy. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole.